I'm Brandi Kruse. Welcome to Undivided. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. Undivided is presented by the founding sponsor, 1530 Mortgage. Today, busy show. We're going to do a deep dive into the investigation into the Border Patrol agents that were accused of whipping migrants. Allie Bradley, an Undivided contributor, will join us with some exclusive information from the southern border. Also, government officials still keeping the press at bay using what I believe are outdated COVID restrictions. We'll discuss that and more. But first, something happened to me today that's never happened to me before. And to be honest, I'm very troubled by it and I'm very upset by it. I currently am in Facebook jail. That's right. I'm in a Facebook timeout for reasons unknown. So yesterday I was trying to post, it's Sunday. I like to get some videos up from the show on Friday in case anybody missed it. I was trying to post some videos, and every time I try to upload a video, it would just sort of disappear. And I was like, that's weird. Maybe there's some sort of outage, some sort of Facebook-wide video posting outage. So I waited a couple hours, went back, tried again, still nothing. And I'm like, man, what is going on here? So today I get into the studio and I'm like, I'm going to try to upload those videos I couldn't upload yesterday. And this time I was doing it on my desktop, not on my phone. And I got this message that said, this feature is temporarily blocked. You recently posted something that violates Facebook policies. So you're temporarily blocked from using this feature. For more information, visit the Help Center. To keep from getting blocked again, please make sure you've read and understand Facebook's community standards. The block will be active for 6 hours more. Okay. So first of all, I did look at the Help Center because I'm like, gosh, what could I have posted that would get my page disabled or temporarily blocked? Because, I post things that are controversial politically, that spark political debate and conversation, but I don't post misinformation or disinformation or engage in conspiracy theories. And so I just really don't know what I could have done that would go that far. And in fact, I kind of scrolled through previous Facebook posts like for the last week, and everything I've posted on Facebook is still up. So if there's something I posted that was so bad, don't you think it would have been taken down? And then I went to the Help Center as they recommended. It has nothing there, no indication, no notification saying why my Facebook account was suspended. And I posted on my other social platforms like, hey guys, FYI, I'm in Facebook jail, because this has never happened to me before. I've got a couple warnings or like something taken down. Like I posted a joke once about kicking a guy in the shin and Facebook took it down for like violence, which was just sort of funny because I'm like, okay, I was making a joke. Clearly Facebook didn't understand the joke. But I posted on my other pages like, hey, I'm in Facebook jail. Here's some comments. That just means you're on the right track. I don't know. Let's see. Maybe you got hacked. Chris says, come on now, confess. Only then can your rehabilitation truly begin. Nate says, I've been suspended several times, and when I click on the CY button, it just displays an error over a blank screen. Andy wrote, I'm waiting for Twitter to start blocking more of us now that Elon Musk pulled out of the Twitter deal, which is probably true. But anyway, so I can laugh at this, right? Like it's kind of, I understand how it's kind of funny, like my Facebook account has been disabled and I have no clue why. I don't know what I did. And so how do I, in the future not do what got me disabled? But now I'm just sort of angry about it and a little distressed by it. And here's why. When I went independent, quit my job, went independent, my only means of disseminating information is through my social media pages. My Twitter, my Facebook, my YouTube, my Patreon, my locals, and by far, I have the largest audience on Facebook. I think it's, let me double check, like 173,000 followers. And so that's a lot of people to be instantly just cut off from. And it's not just about, my Facebook page being taken away. It's about my livelihood being taken away for 24 hours. If I can't get stuff posted on social media, I can't direct people to my subscription pages, Patreon, and locals, and I can't communicate now with 173,000 people. So yeah, Facebook is taking away my social media account for 24 hours, but they're also taking away a big chunk of my livelihood for 24 hours. And I've also heard of people being suspended from Facebook indefinitely. Like their accounts are taken down without any notice and they have absolutely no recourse. And I have no recourse here. There's no place where I can be like, hey, this shouldn't have happened. I just want to take you through this because I think it's fascinating about just restricting speech. And again, if I knew what I had done and I knew in my mind like, oh yeah, of course that was going to get me suspended, that's different. But you guys know me. I mean, there's really nothing I think I've ever posted besides that one joke about kicking someone in the shin that would cross a line of any kind. And so I'm just confused. But anyway, so when I try to post something, again, that error comes up. It says, if you think this doesn't go against our community standards, let us know. But again, it doesn't say what this is. So I click on let us know, and it gives me this little box to say, please explain why you think this was an error. But then it says, while we aren't able to review individual reports, the feedback you provide will help us improve the ways we keep Facebook safe. So I can tell them why I think it was an error. But one, I don't know what the post is. And two, they're saying here that they're not even going to read this. So again, I have zero recourse at all. And it worries me, I guess, as an independent journalist. What if on Facebook one time I post something and they just take my whole account down and I never get it back? That is my livelihood. This is how I make money to support my family. So in that sense, I mean, I'm honestly pretty pissed off by it. I just like to know why. And I am glad that I have the other pages like Patreon and Locals where I feel safer to be able to post things without having to worry about this. But those are pages that are pretty new and they're just growing. And so now I'm just instantly cut off from my biggest social media audience. So we'll see what happens. Maybe when they reinstate my account, right now it says it's just a couple more hours. So maybe when they reinstate it, I'll get some sort of notification from Facebook as to how I wound up in Facebook jail. I'd really like to know, but yeah, I'm a little upset. Like one day I guess I'm concerned that one day my accounts are just going to be disabled, and then how am I going to make a living? And so maybe it pushes me to just get my own website or something that doesn't have these sort of restrictions. But it's really scary. I mean, Facebook has a lot of control over people who use it for their livelihoods. So that's certainly the case for me. There was a story over the weekend that kind of broke on Friday. I talked about it in the unDivided newsletter that comes out every Sunday. That I think is a lesson in not jumping to conclusions. Of course, we all remember when the photos came out showing the Border Patrol agents on horseback that appeared to be, they very much appeared to be whipping migrants who were trying to come into the U.S. across the Rio Grande. It's sort of that thing where it's like, you just have this moment that's captured in time. And yes, it tells a story, but sometimes it can tell the wrong story. So this one photo that was taken and published, and honestly, the person who took it should have known better initially that it appeared to show something that it didn't show. But everybody jumped onto it, and understandably so. Like, look, if you have Border Patrol agents who were whipping migrants, that's a problem, right? But it just shows this culture of jumping to conclusions. You guys will remember that President Joe Biden at the time had some very strong words for these Border Patrol agents.
You said on the campaign trail that you were going to restore the moral standing of the U.S., that you were going to immediately end Trump's assault on the dignity of immigrant communities. Given what we saw at the border this week, have you failed in that promise? And this is happening under your watch. Do you take responsibility for the chaos that's unfolding?
Of course I take responsibility. I'm president, but it was horrible what to see, as you saw. To see people treated like they did, horses barely running them over, people being strapped, it's outrageous. I promise you those people will pay. They will be, an investigation underway now, and there will be consequences. There will be consequences. It's an embarrassment, but it's beyond an embarrassment. It's dangerous. It's wrong. It sends the wrong message around the world. It sends the wrong message at home. It's simply not who we are.
And of course, not long after that, you had even some journalists come out and say, no, they weren't whipping migrants. These are split reins that they use to control the horses. The photo is just sort of out of context. And so this was debunked pretty quickly. However, there was an official investigation done. We'll talk about the findings of it. It's not going to be a surprise. It found that they weren't whipping migrants. We'll talk about that in a moment. But again, I think it goes to the real danger of jumping to conclusions, even when something seems very obvious. And I'm going to take an L here. I had to learn this lesson the hard way. You guys will remember Nick Sandmann. He is the young man who was caught on video, apparently, it looked like, harassing a Native American man at the Lincoln Memorial. And this clip of that video was put out there, went viral. And at the time when I saw it, I'm like, wow, this little kid is like a total piece of and needs better parenting. I was totally against Nick Sandmann because I guess in that moment, I didn't think that there could be a video that would show more, that would change my mind. And of course, we know that Nick Sandmann was the one who was harassed, and he was just sort of standing his ground in that moment. It led to Nick Sandmann suing some mainstream media outlets and getting big payouts. But that was a big lesson for me, like, oh gosh, you really need to pump the brakes and not have an instant visceral reaction to something. Because, you had this story about the whipping of migrants that dominated the media when there was other things happening at the border that should have been getting that attention, like the surge of migrants across the border that led to this incident in the first place. So anyway, this official findings of the investigation are out. And not only do they, clear the agents of wrongdoing in terms of the whipping that never was, but it also talks about some of the really severe circumstances of that day that were unfolding and just paints a really vivid picture of the crisis at the southern border. And so I spoke earlier today with unDivided contributor Ali Bradley, who's of course been covering border issues extensively, and she got her hands on the full internal investigation. Ali Bradley, thank you so much for being back on unDivided. This is interesting stuff. We kind of knew a long time ago that these Border Patrol agents hadn't whipped Haitian migrants. There was the photo, and then it was debunked pretty quickly. And so this report basically solidifies what we already knew in that regard, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. We saw those photos. We saw the photographer come out and say that never happened. No contact was ever made. We saw the video come out from the Associated Press, a journalist that was also there, showing that no contact was made. So this report does solidify that. However, they were never exonerated on the same public stage that they were condemned on, Brandi. So this report, not only does it outline exactly what the issues were at that situation in Del Rio on September 19th, but also identifies some of the corrective action that they're taking. It does not talk about the discipline that they're seeking out. However, a DHS source does tell me that they are going to be disciplined. They will be seeing a 14-day unpaid suspension. However, their supervisors can decrease that if they deem it necessary. But yeah, it's really interesting because some of the things that we heard about on Friday from the Customs and Border Protection Commissioner, Chris Magnus, don't necessarily line up with what I'm reading in this DHS investigation that I got my hands on through a DHS source.
So let's hit the brakes for a second, because you mentioned, nobody was whipped, right? But there's still going to be probably some discipline here because there's some separate things that came up as part of the investigation. Can you talk about what those are?
Yeah, so a couple of those things are unprofessional behavior based on the grounds of what they would deem professionalism. So they believe that some of these agents, after going through all of these reports, did conduct themselves unprofessionally in some ways. One of them grabbing a migrant by the shirt. We saw that in some of those images. Another one was some derogatory statements that were deemed as discriminatory in this report, where one of the agents had yelled something at the migrants, saying, "This is why your country is expletive. You treat your women like this." And in this report, it also goes through and kind of corroborates what this Border Patrol agent was saying, that this man that he was kind of trying to stop from going back and forth between Mexico and the United States was actually shielding himself behind women and children. So he was saying, that was a frustrated comment that he made. He didn't mean for it to be discriminatory, but obviously that's what it was deemed. And it's pretty hard to look at it in any other way.
Yeah. So, and you can say it on here. You might not, but he said, this is why your country is shit, right? Because you treat your women and children like this. And he contends, and the report backs it up, that it was because he was like using women and children as shields. But as you said, he still has to conduct himself professionally, and obviously that's not professional. And then the use of force incident with the t-shirt grabbing. So one of the other things, and really quickly, I want to just put a bow on the whipping thing, right? I don't want to spend a lot of time dwelling on that because the nation has been dwelling on that for like 10 months. There are some Republicans who believe, including House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, that President Biden owes those Border Patrol agents an apology for saying last September that they will pay for what they did. What do you think, Allie? Do you think the president's going to offer up an apology to these agents?
I mean, I think that the closest thing that we got to exoneration for these men was on Friday. I don't think that there's going to be, like I said in the beginning of this conversation, that there's going to be public exoneration like there was condemnation. I think that there's a degree where they deserve some kind of public exoneration because they have been sitting on desk duty. They have been receiving death threats as soon as this happened. These men that were involved, their life is upside down because of this. There's photos that, the photos heard around the world. And it sent shockwaves. And there's no denying that these photos made people feel uncomfortable in some capacity. But the fact of the matter is that they didn't make contact, and that in the report, it says that there was no evidence that a migrant was struck or whipped in any capacity. And, they were also talking about the twirling of the split reins, because that's something that advanced riders use and know. And as soon as this story came out, horse people, equestrian people knew instantly that these weren't whips, that they were split reins. And when you twirl the reins, it's apparently a tactic that helps move the horse in a certain direction and really gain control of that horse backwards, forwards, left, and right. And that's something that Chris Magnus said was not displayed in training, was not taught to these Horse Patrol unit members. However, I can tell you that the acting program manager for the National Horse Patrol program was interviewed in this entire investigation. And she said she's actually been an instructor since 2004. And she watched all of the footage, Brandi. She went through all of the images and said that these agents used the tactics that were necessary and the tactics that were taught to them in this situation. And it did not look like they were ever endangering any of the migrants with their horses. Some of them were saying in this report that there was unnecessary force by using those horses to kind of maneuver around and kind of get those people in a corralled setting kind of. But this person who's in a role where they're training these gentlemen and women saying, no, this was exactly the techniques that we would have taught, that we do teach. And so that didn't really line up with what Commissioner Magnus was saying at all. Publicly, he said that was not something that they learned in training. So the condemnation kind of continued in that press conference as well on Friday.
So for the sake of optics, are they going to change what these horseback agents are allowed to do with these split reins in the future?
I wouldn't say that they're going to continue to train them to do that if it's in every single training module or not. I'm not sure if that's something they'll continue to do, but I will tell you that the Horse Patrol unit will remain. It will continue to operate. It is one of the oldest units in the Border Patrol, and they're going to continue to use it, but they're not going to use it in the capacity of crowd control. That's a big issue here too, Brandi, because I learned that in this report, most of the agents that were involved were never trained in crowd control, especially on horseback. Now, Chief Raul Ortiz wanted these Horse Patrol units to be present, wanted it in full force in case there was an uprising, because there was talk about Title 42 being implemented, these people being repatriated or sent back to Mexico. And I remember sitting down there under that bridge with the sheriff. And when that word got out, 202, I believe, DPS troopers were deployed to kind of encircle that entire area in case a kind of riot or some kind of uprising did occur. So these Horse Patrol unit members were put in place to be prepared for crowd control, something that they had no idea what to do. They were even told to shut down the boat ramp. They had no idea what that meant. They thought it meant stop people from coming over, because when someone says shut it down at the boat ramp, that probably means to you that you're going to block people from coming into the US. So they didn't have a lot of guidance here. And they also asked for help. A Texas DPS sergeant says help never came. So they were kind of set up for a loss if you look at it that way. But going back to the crowd control piece of it, Brandi, I reached out to some of my agents who are not Horse Patrol units, who are sources of mine. I talked to them last night and I said, did you undergo any kind of crowd control training? And they all said no. that two of them that were older and that have already retired. They had academy long ago when Chief Ortiz also had academy, and he says that crowd control was more part of it. That kind of went away, and they deemed crowd control as more of a protest or a riot setting, not necessarily 500 people like what the guys on the ground are experiencing every day. But it takes one, foul attitude or one misstep for something to go wrong, and these guys still have not been trained in crowd control or know what to do. However, if they're going through the academy now, there is some training that is now woven into the academy that helps them know how to mitigate a situation when you're dealing with 200 to 500 people a day, like what they're seeing right now.
And to me, this is just an example of what happens in a lot of major news stories in this country, where it's this idea of selective outrage and people get distracted by a shiny object. Now, had they been whipping migrants, clearly that would have been a serious issue, but it was debunked so quickly, yet it continued to be, the bulk of the topic of conversation, as opposed to what you just detailed, which is how overrun these agents were, how they weren't trained to do what they were being asked to do, how they called for backup and didn't get any. To me, that's the more important story. That's the bigger story, not some debunked horsewhipping incident.
Well, and to go with that, Brandi, in the report, it also states, based on several agents' testimony, that the quarterly training that they're supposed to have, even if, say, they did have some training to mitigate a situation where there was an uprising or anything like that, because they don't all get the exact same training from what I can understand from talking to my sources as well. They say that this is more reserved for BORTAC, things like that. But what's really interesting is that a lot of them haven't had the training since early 2021, if they had it at all. And then the other side of that is the quarterly trainings were pushed off because of processing migrants, an influx of migrants. So they haven't even been able to undergo their trainings or brush up on any of their training in any capacity, not just crowd control, because the quarterly trainings have been pushed because of lack of resources. I mean, that's what the overwhelming and overarching problem has been since I've started covering the border issue in the first place is, there's not enough manpower to do what they're doing. And they, on Friday, last week, they even pulled back, they recalled every agent from the field in both Brackettville and Carrizo Springs, which is in the Del Rio sector, the busiest sector. They pulled them for transport and processing. So that means unmanned border. That's exactly what that means. So you don't have guys out in the field. Meanwhile, in Brackettville, they had just arrested a known rapist, a sex offender. So, those are the kinds of things that aren't able to be caught if you have everybody inside for processing and transport. They just don't have the resources.
Yeah, and it's just, people get mad. And I agree with the decision not to have people on horseback deal in crowd control. I agree with that in a regular protest that's not at the border, just because you're talking about an animal in the mix of people. And I just feel like there's so many things that can go wrong. But for people who don't want Border Patrol agents doing crowd control, well, you have to deal with the immigration crisis then, so you don't have crowds coming across the southern border. Allie, you've been down there for what, a year now?
Next month will be a year, yeah.
Has it gotten any better, do you think? Are we on any sort of positive trajectory?
I wish I could say that it felt like it was getting better. Every single time I go down to the border, it's with the intention of finding out, are policies in place? Are things in place to mitigate what's going on? Are additional resources being brought in? What does that look like? And every month it gets worse. I mean, you are seeing what the governor is doing right now, where he signed that executive order late last week saying that DPS and National Guard could start sending people back across the port of entry. Now, they can't cross the legal boundary into Mexico, but they can bring them to the port of entry and basically say, go back across the border. And that's what we saw Sheriff Coe do as well. So people are taking matters into their own hands. So if things were getting better, you wouldn't have to do that. The federal response would be enough, and it's just not. That's the governor's biggest issue right now. And I mean, right now, we've got 25 counties that are on board with declaring an invasion. We have Ken Paxton saying he wants to declare an invasion, who's the attorney general. We have the lieutenant governor saying, comparing to what's happening at the border to Pearl Harbor. So when you see things like that, and the governor signs an executive order that's obviously going to just completely be annihilated by federal courts, because this is a state versus federal issue. And the only way around it is to invoke articles of the Constitution, not just sign an executive order. So it'll be interesting to see what the governor does in the coming days, what kind of retaliation he's going to get from immigration advocates and things like that. One of the immigration attorneys I work with did say there's no doubt that there's going to be pushback and backlash for this, and this will not stand in the courts.
Well, I think the Pearl Harbor comparison is stupid, but I just hate comparisons in general. But, it is serious what's going on at the border.
But yeah, to say that we're being attacked at the border like Pearl Harbor, I mean, I wouldn't go that far, Brandi, from what I've experienced, what I've seen. I even asked the former, excuse me for kind of escaping on his title, but Mark Morgan was a head of CBP, was top notch, and he worked in the FBI. And, he was saying, I asked him, I said, is there a less abrasive word? I mean, you know me, I have to always kind of ask the opposite side of things. So, because it kind of, elicits a visceral response when you say invasion. And he said, you know what, you're right, but that is the law. That's what the constitutional code reads, and that's what they have to go with. And so he said, is there a different option? Because I said, we're still trying to get the administration, by we, I mean, America, pretty much, that's been paying attention to this border crisis, is still trying to get the federal government to get the administration to recognize this as a crisis at all. And that's just hasn't even happened. So to go that far as to say it's an invasion is, again, it's a little abrasive.
Yeah, I mean, but, look, if the Biden administration or Democrats don't want this to be in the hands of Governor Greg Abbott in Texas or the Republican control in Texas, then they can step up and do something, but they're not doing it. And so you're leaving these states along the border to fend for themselves, and then you're complaining about how they fend for themselves, and it just seems really silly. Ali Bratt, go ahead.
The government, though, thinks what they're doing is the humane side of things, right? Because they're allowing people to come in and claim asylum, whether they only have an economic claim or not. These people are coming in and able to claim asylum. But the problem is the amount of people dying trying to do that. So how can this be about humanity? We talked about that. It's a hard one, to justify and say, yeah, this is obviously a humanitarian issue and needs humanitarian response, because that's just not what we're seeing.
Well, it's the same with the homeless crisis and the drug epidemic. You're allowing people to continue a behavior that is killing them. And the same with the southern border, to make it so porous that people are taking these dangerous journeys. It's killing them. We've seen that. You've seen that firsthand. And so I agree with you. I don't know how you can call that compassion or, humanitarian or anything like that. Ali Bradley, appreciate you as always. And thank you so much for just your continued insight on the border. I know it's going to be even up here in Washington State, we've got the 8th Congressional District, which is a swing seat, and they're running ads, the Republicans, about border security up in Washington State, which I find fascinating.
If it will affect every single American in some way, shape, or form, they just don't know it yet. I mean, you look at what's happening down in El Paso, and each person that gets hurt, there's 322 injuries from people falling off the border wall, $43,000 a person. Well, now El Paso is putting in, to have that money that was never paid reimbursed. And, that's something that's a reality. And when you have 160 nationalities coming into our country, you have people from Senegal, Cambodia, you have people from Uzbekistan coming over. Who's teaching these children, and what are those school systems going to look like? So things are going to be dramatically different. And, I would just encourage people to open up their eyes a little bit, see it, look around, see what's going on, but also understand and be compassionate, because there are a lot of people that are coming in that do have valid asylum claims that are kind of lumped in with this mess, for lack of a better word.
That's well put. Ali Bradley, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandi Kruse.
That is my conversation with unDivided contributor Ali Bradley, who's been doing some great work down at the southern border. So you just see this sort of pattern of, shiny object. That is important. Like, had they been whipping migrants, I can understand news coverage. But again, it was debunked pretty quickly, yet they still focused on this shiny object. Well, we have a literal crisis at our southern border of people flooding into this country, a humanitarian crisis and a public safety crisis. Absolutely both of those things. So I think that's the fault of the media, and it's the fault of politicians who glob onto things quickly because it suits whatever political agenda they might have in the moment. All right, I have talked about how I think politicians used the pandemic to a certain extent to avoid media scrutiny. I took major issue during the pandemic with the way in which all virtual press conferences were run. Now, there was a point at the beginning of the pandemic where it was like, oh yeah, of course, we're all at home, we're all trying to help out and do our part, and we're gonna do these press conferences virtually. And I was on nearly every single one of them that Washington Governor Jay Inslee had. And the way that they worked is they'd email you the link and they'd say, if you want to ask a question at this press conference, email us back and we'll put you on the list for questions. And so I'd email back and they'd put you on the list for questions. And then you'd get called and they'd unmute you. And then as soon as you were done asking your question, you'd get muted again. And so invariably, Governor Jay Inslee would completely ignore the question and not answer it, but you had no recourse. You couldn't say anything because you were muted. There was no function. Sometimes if you were lucky, the next reporter would follow up and say, hey, you didn't answer Brandi's question or so-and-so's question. But it really limited our ability to be able to ask the governor questions and hold politicians accountable, or at least get really in-depth information during the pandemic on behalf of viewers and readers. Now, over time, obviously, the press conferences have started to go back to in person, which is great. I can't tell you how different it is trying to do a press conference online versus being there, reading body language, being able to go back and forth with the politician if you need to. It's a totally different thing. The same with interviews, virtual interviews versus in-person interviews. But I was sent this today that some politicians and some political offices are still limiting attendance to press conferences due to COVID restrictions. And I just thought that this was so bizarre. We talked on the show the other day about how Governor Jay Inslee is mandating boosters for a bunch of state employees if they want to keep their jobs, which I just think, oh my gosh, we're so past that. This is the same thing. So this is from the office of Washington State Attorney General Bob Ferguson. He's having a press conference today to announce the first cold case convictions stemming from DNA forensic genetic genealogy. And so that's interesting. I'm sure there'll be some reporters there. But if you scroll down, it says, consistent with the Attorney General's negotiated policy, all in-person attendees are required to show proof of full vaccination and booster, complete a wellness screening. Individuals who cannot verify their vaccination and booster status will not be admitted to the press conference. You may complete this verification and screening process in person or, if preferred, in advance using the Clear app. I'm going to get to the Clear app in a moment. So by these standards, more than 2 years into COVID, I would not be able to go cover this press conference in person at the Attorney General's office because I am vaccinated, but I am not up to date on boosters. Because I feel like at this point, I have had COVID already. It wasn't great, but it wasn't severe. And that was maybe a couple months ago. And I am a healthy young adult. And so I don't feel a need to get a booster. And I work for myself, so I don't have to get a booster. Nobody's telling me to. But by this, I wouldn't be able to go to a press conference at the Attorney General's office as a member of the media if I'm not up to date on boosters. And then also you have to do this wellness screening. When we know that a lot of people who have COVID don't show any signs or symptoms. And I think if people were sick, if journalists were sick, they're not going to show up at some press conference if they're not feeling well. I think that's just common sense at this point. So anyway, if you click on this pre-screening, look at how involved this is. Oh my gosh, just to get into a press conference as a member of the media. Like to go through all these steps about downloading the Clear app, going through, providing them with all of this information, doing a daily wellness screening. And I mean, I did these wellness screenings. It wasn't through Clear, but it was just when I was working at Fox, where it was like, hey, are you feeling okay today? Have you had any of these symptoms? And if you just hit no, it was like, okay, green light, now you can go to work. But they were completely useless. And if you had someone who was sick and wanted to go somewhere anyway, they could just lie. So it's just silly. But I think, are we not past the point in the pandemic where we would prevent members of the press from covering a government, an elected official's press conference because they're not up to date on boosters? That's wild to me. And so I was glad that somebody sent this to me because I just didn't know that this kind of stuff was going on. And it just makes it more difficult for the press to do its job. Look, I'm sure there are many members of the media who are going to be there, who are happy to oblige these requirements. But for, like I said, I wouldn't be able to go. And I'm not going to get a booster simply to go to a press conference at the Attorney General's office. Now, it does give an option to be able to attend online. But again, we know how that works. We know that doing a press conference online is not as good as doing a press conference in person. So that's just silly to me. I have reached out to the Attorney General's office to ask what they mean by consistent with the AGO's negotiated policy. Like, who did they negotiate that policy with? Did any media organizations agree to that policy? So I'll let you guys know what they say. All right, we tried to end the show on Mondays with a little bit of feedback from you, the viewers. I keep getting a bunch of stuff from folks about my winding up in Facebook jail. I asked on Twitter, how did I wind up in Facebook jail? Wrong answers only. Let's see. You did not pay the renewal fee for your blue check mark. Thanks, Ryan. Chop Citizen on Twitter says, you didn't use your preferred pronouns as assigned to you by Facebook, z, zem, zum. You noticed gas prices have gone down. You posted a pic of you and Hunter having a good time. Okay, I didn't do that, but I'm afraid to even say the name Hunter because it might get me in a Facebook jail again. But there's all this conversation. This brings me, let me just touch on this quick. I'm sure you guys have noticed that there are some reports that on 4chan, some hackers have gained access to, I think it was an iPad belonging to Hunter Biden, and they're pushing out all this information that allegedly came off this iPad. And what they're pushing out is pretty salacious. I mean, some really disturbing text messages that are clearly about women or escorts. There's a lot of graphic photos, some content related to drug use. And you might be wondering, why is the mainstream media not talking about this? I do want to defend the mainstream media in two regards on this and just take you, like, I'm going to put my mainstream media cap back on and take you into sort of the conversations. Now, I'm sure there's some politics that go into ignoring any of this, but one, it is a really slippery slope as a mainstream media organization to use information that was ill-gotten, to use information that was stolen or information that was hacked. You're putting yourself in a really precarious situation. And so I think that's part of it, is there's some legal questions about, okay, this information was gotten by hackers, put out on 4chan, it's stolen. How do we really use stolen information? And then the other thing is the provenance of this information. Again, you're talking about 4chan, like the depths of the internet. We know that any photo can be manipulated, any video can be manipulated, screenshots of text messages can obviously be manipulated. And so there's no telling, how do you as a news organization try to verify the authenticity of some of this stuff, certainly quickly, to be able to get a story out there when it's coming from like the far reaches of the internet. That's a real concern. You can't just say, oh, this is out on 4chan by anonymous users, I'm going to pick it up and put it on the news. So there are some legitimate reasons why the mainstream media isn't touching this story in a way that I'm sure a lot of you would like them to. That being said, some of the revelations that are coming out, we already know that Hunter Biden has had issues with drugs. We already know that. That's established. We know he's had issues with women, let's put it that way. And so what is coming out is a lot of stuff that is just sort of in that similar vein. So, it definitely, if some of it's true, it's like really astonishing. But I just wanted to clarify why I think, if I had to defend the mainstream media on this, why I think there are two reasons that might preclude them from picking up the story, at least very quickly. Okay, some more comments from you guys. I had there was a lot of negative reaction to my commentary from the show on Friday about Brittany Griner. As you guys know, I just really think that at the end of the day, she's a fellow American and she's being used by Russia for political purposes. And that's wrong. And I think regardless of whether you dislike Brittany Griner for protesting the national anthem, at the end of the day, she's still a fellow American, and she's being used by a foreign enemy of the United States, and we should all be sort of in her corner. I don't disagree that she broke the law in Russia. She's going to have to pay some consequences for that, but what's happening to her is above and beyond, and it's because she's an American. So anyway, there was, I would say, some mixed reaction to my commentary defending Brittany Griner. John wrote, "You bring drugs into another country, you do stupid things, you pay a stupid tax." Nolan wrote, "Griner is just another spoiled rich American who hates the privileges afforded her by birth. The rich don't believe the rules apply to them." Let's see. The one I think response that I thought, okay, I can see where you're coming from. Bill Caldwell. He said, "It's good to hear your perspective, yet I don't agree with your premise that just because the Constitution grants people the right to do certain things, that means all such actions are equally American and we need to stick together." He said, "It's legal for the KKK to march and spew hatred, as they have done for years, claiming it as their constitutional right as Americans. This does not mean that we as a country have to declare that as viable and acceptable behavior, nor would we want our U.S. government to intervene if a KKK leader was imprisoned in a foreign country." So I understand what you're saying. I'm actually not sure it's legal to be a member of the KKK anymore. I'd have to look that up. But, one of my arguments with Brittany Griner was she was exercising her First Amendment right when she protested the national anthem, yet we're using that protest as a way to paint her as un-American, and I didn't agree with that. And what Bill is saying, and it's a point well taken, that if we had, white supremacists who are out marching, we wouldn't say, oh, they're just as American as us because they're exercising their First Amendment right, and we wouldn't be demanding the White House bring them back if they were imprisoned in a foreign country. And so, Bill, I agree with you. It's a point well taken, so I understand that, sir. All right, that's it for this episode of Undivided on this Monday, as I'm languishing in Facebook jail. But hey, this is another opportunity for me to try to encourage you to become an Undivided subscriber, because I guess I am concerned that one day Facebook just will not be there for me for whatever reason. Maybe I'm a target of the little Facebook bots or something. And so, on Patreon and Locals, I'm pretty confident that whatever I put out there is going to be there and that the pages aren't going to be taken down. And that's important for me. Like I said, it's how I support myself, is through independent journalism. So if you want to become a subscriber, you can do so in two ways: patreon.com, patreon.com/undivided, or by becoming a contributor on my Locals community, brandikruse.locals.com. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to giving common sense a comeback. Remember, for subscribers, we have a subscriber-only episode every single week on Wednesday. I've got a great show taking shape for you then. And so I will see subscribers on Wednesday. I'll see the rest of you on Friday. Undivided is presented by the founding sponsor, 1530 Mortgage. You can visit them at 1530mortgage.com.